Hi, my name's Phil. I like to come out politics, and in this video I'd like to discuss a little Tory scandal which is blowing up because Rishi Sunak is too weak to do anything about it. It is, of course, the little gambling den that Downing Street seemed to have had going as Sunak was preparing to call the election. Multiple people who were close to Rishi Sunak as he was deciding to call the election have now been caught in the Gambling Commission investigation into suspicious betting patterns. All betting on a July election just a few days before it was called. A police officer assigned to Sunak's personal protection has been arrested for placing a bet, and now the wife of the Conservative campaign director, Laura Saunders, has been caught. The campaign director himself, Tony Lee, has stood down from his role. So now, as a result of all this, the Conservative campaign director has taken a leave of absence 2 weeks before the general election. This prompted my new favourite comment on the channel from David. Any comment on the shock news that the Tories had a campaign director? I laughed at that one. So my thoughts on that are that it will be interesting to see if their absence makes any difference at all. Tonight is another leadership debate of sorts. It's a question time, but featuring the leaders of the four largest parties. So being question time, there will be more emphasis on the audience making comments and asking questions, which could be interesting. But it is just possible that Keir Starmer will want to raise this betting scandal tonight. Not just because it's a stick to beat the Tories with. He's got no shortage of those. But because it's a perfect illustration of the rot in the Conservative Party. In fact, if I could advise Starmer, it would be to ask this at some point. I would ask Swinney and Davey, who will both be present as well, if they would have stood by any candidates in their party who had done something like this. They will both immediately say, no, of course not. Starmer can then say, see, we all agree that this is not a matter which requires deliberation. It is potentially criminal behaviour and brings politics into disrepute. Why is it only the Tories who think the rules don't apply to them? I think that would be a killer line. But let's consider a few factors here. So this scandal began with Sunak's principal private secretary placing a bet on a July election when he almost certainly had inside knowledge, and that there would be a July election, and he did it a few days before the announcement. Now at that point you go, okay, that's one idiot letting the side down. He didn't conspire with anyone, he just placed the bet himself. It's no reflection on the wider party or Sunak, except of course Sunak took no action when it was announced. And he could have done as well, because he was told about it. We didn't find out until last week, but he found out a week earlier. So he had time to replace that candidate. So he didn't even have to risk what was probably one of the few seats the Tories may win. He could have replaced the candidate. He chose not to. So at that point, it started to reflect poorly on his own judgment. Then the police officer was arrested. Now you could argue, well, that's clearly not Sunak's fault, except for the fact that the officer was arrested and not the junior minister all a lower standard of accountability for the government than the police. Because remember, the bet was placed before Parliament was dissolved. So all these miscreants who were MPs were MPs. They were in office at the time. So it's absolutely a potentially criminal offence here. But now the situation's way worse. Multiple Tories have been involved. It's possible, yes, that they just acted independently to place these bets, but that would require us to put it down to a coincidence that so many have done so. Another possibility is that someone within that circle openly suggested, whether jokingly or not, making a few quid once the decision had been made. Oh, we should all put a bet on it, that'd be a good laugh. And then some of them have decided to do that. Now that may explain why multiple people decided to do that all at the same time. And again, Sunak is taking no action. The police have taken action against their own. Sunak has not against his. They are still candidates in the election. The fact that Tony Lee, the former campaign director, has stood down from his role is not quite enough, is it? After all, there might be someone easily able to jump into that role, and let's be honest, nobody working on the Tory campaign is really going to convince anyone that their absence will be missed. which might sound harsh on those who are doing their jobs. I mean, some of them will be just working to organise campaign events, and they're organising them well enough. It's not their fault that the idiots taking part in them haven't got a clue what they're doing. Like a football coach who's dumped with a load of unsuitable players by the director. Only so much you can do with the tools you're given to work with. But nonetheless, you really wouldn't want to be associated with this campaign. And Labour are, of course, predictably piling the pressure on. Pat McFadden, who's Labour's national campaign coordinator, has written a letter setting out the obvious points and asking questions of Sunak's leadership decisions. Keir Starmer followed it up by stating if any Labour candidate had been guilty of something like this, they would no longer be a Labour candidate. At a time when much of the public believe that all politicians are as bad as each other, Sunak, with his lack of judgment and lack of backbone, has allowed Labour an easy way to open up a discussion about this. And it was made all the more tragic because yesterday the Conservatives were running a social media campaign which featured adverts that were largely featuring like a roulette wheel, and it was urging voters not to take a gamble on Labour. Oh, if you gamble on Labour, you always lose. Shall we put it this way? The adverts have been taken down. They've all been pulled now. The Tories had attempted to take a running jump at yet another attack line against Labour in this election campaign and ran straight into a brick wall of their own making. Labour are also saying that because they've been monitoring the betting odds on certain dates, to look for variation, to see if they could see any sign. And they say they noticed a shortening of the odds just before the election was called. So now, of course, the question for the Gambling Commission is, are there lots of bets that were placed on this July election within a small time frame? It is something they're investigating anyway, which is how these latest revelations have come about. Just how widespread is this illegal Tory gambling circle? Then it's worth considering something else, because this speaks of a fundamental insight into the Conservative Party right now. When we found out about the first case, I made mention of the fact you can't actually put a large bet on political events for obvious reasons. So realistically, though, placing those bets could only win you a few £100s. A lot of money to millions of people that these Tories have bled dry for 14 years, but not to those at the top of the tree. Why would people risk their reputations and even careers for a few £100s? I mean, they could get criminal convictions out of this. It's mad, isn't it? And my response to that is, if you consider what happened to the Conservatives, particularly I would say since Boris Johnson, those in Downing Street have become accustomed to living in an environment free of consequence. Under Johnson, you think about all the parties. Under Sunak, you think about the insane policies, the U-turn, the different mad policy ideas. They lost 2 local elections really badly, but there were no consequences. Sunak was given the leeway by his party to do whatever he liked, pretty much make as big an arse of things as he liked, and he would still get to lead them into the general election. Sunak was freed from consequences, and so too were his circle. The same occurred for different reasons under Boris Johnson. The staff around him were allowed to live consequence-free. So there's been an environment operating in Downing Street for years now, which is free of consequences. So the rest of us, like when we're considering a course of action, there's part of our brain which carries out a risk-reward calculation to decide if it's worth it. Now, there's a lot of people who aren't very good at that calculation, but the calculation is there nonetheless. It's not there for these people, is it? There are no consequences for failure. So having developed in that ecosystem, it makes sense that they would do something that is to us insanely risky. You risk your reputation, criminal conviction, future employment. You're risking all of that for what for them is a minor reward. Sounds mad. But to them, if your risk reward calculations never have a risk element to it, then even a small reward is like, why not? Whatever some people think that the Conservatives were in the past, it's in the past now. This is what they are now. Reckless and greedy with absolutely no sense of consequence. They should be nowhere near the heart of government. Vote them all out. But there we are. Those are my thoughts. If you enjoyed the video, please subscribe for further content and click the like button. You can also sign up for memberships if you'd like to support the channel further. Thanks for watching, and until next time, I'll see you later.